Vic Morrow should have been remembered as one of Hollywood's most compelling actors, known for his ability to portray hardened villains and his defining role as Sergeant Chip Saunders in the acclaimed TV series Combat. However, his name became forever associated with one of the most infamous tragedies in film history. A horrific on-set accident would claim his life, along with two child actors, and lead to sweeping changes in the way movies were made. Born on Valentine's Day in 1929 in the Bronx, New York, Vic Morrow grew up in a working-class immigrant family. His parents, both Russian Jewish immigrants, originally gave him the name Victor Morozov. When he was still a child, the family relocated to Asbury Park, New Jersey, but even with the change in scenery, Morrow struggled in school. He was restless and uninterested in academics, often finding himself at odds with authority. By the time he reached his teenage years, Morrow was eager for a way out of the classroom. That opportunity came in the form of the United States Navy. Without hesitation, he dropped out of high school and enlisted, seeing it as a fresh start. However, it didn't take long for him to realize that military life wasn't what he had imagined. The rigid structure and discipline didn't suit his independent nature, and it soon became clear that he had no intention of making the Navy his long-term career. Rather than committing to the service, Morrow saw it as a stepping stone. He took advantage of the GI Bill to further his education, enrolling in pre-law at Florida State University. At first, law seemed like a respectable and stable path, and the warm Florida sunshine made it an attractive place to study. But before long, he discovered something that captured his passion far more than legal textbooks: acting. His first taste of performing came when he landed a role in a college play. The moment he stepped on stage, he knew he had found his true calling. The energy of live performance, the challenge of embodying different characters, and the excitement of storytelling all captivated him. Determined to pursue acting seriously, he made a bold decision. He left Florida behind and moved to New York City, enrolling in professional acting classes. It was a risk, but one that would soon pay off. Morrow's dedication quickly earned him recognition, and it wasn't long before he secured his first major theatrical role. He was cast as Stanley Kowalski in a touring production of A Streetcar Named Desire, stepping into the same iconic role that had made Marlon Brando a star. Playing the rugged, volatile Stanley was an electrifying experience, but as much as he loved the stage, Morrow had his sights set on something even bigger: Hollywood. During his time in acting school, he met Barbara Turner, a fellow aspiring actor. The two quickly became close, supporting each other as they pursued their dreams. Their relationship blossomed, and before long, they became a couple. Morrow's big break finally came when he landed a role in a film, and with that opportunity, he and Turner packed their bags and moved to Los Angeles, ready to take on the entertainment industry together. Their future seemed full of promise, but no one could have foreseen the tragic fate that would eventually befall him. In 1955, Morrow made his film debut in Blackboard Jungle, a hard-hitting drama about rebellious teenagers and troubled inner-city schools. The film tackled controversial themes such as juvenile delinquency, racial tensions, and violence in education, topics that were rarely addressed in Hollywood at the time. Morrow was cast as Artie West, the film's main antagonist, a violent and defiant high school student. The irony, of course, was that at 26 years old, he was far from being a teenager. His mature appearance made the casting choice questionable, but it was ultimately overshadowed by the film's impact. Blackboard Jungle became a sensation, sparking national conversations about youth crime and education reform. The film also helped introduce rock and roll to mainstream audiences, featuring Bill Haley and his Comet song Rock Around the Clock, which became a cultural phenomenon. While Morrow's performance as a tough, street-smart delinquent stood out, the role also set the tone for the kinds of characters he would be cast as throughout his career: dangerous, brooding, and often menacing figures. Blackboard Jungle wasn't just a controversial film, it became a cultural phenomenon. Its raw and unfiltered portrayal of teenage delinquency shocked audiences and ignited a nationwide debate about youth violence. Critics accused the movie of inspiring real-life acts of vandalism and school riots, with some blaming it for an increase in teenage rebellion. It was one of the first films to depict inner-city schools as battlegrounds, and for many adults it was deeply unsettling. For Vic Morrow, however, the film's impact was far more personal. His portrayal of Artie West, a ruthless and menacing delinquent, was so intense that he reportedly struggled to leave the character behind once filming ended. Whether it was the psychological toll of playing such a dark role or the way audiences now perceived him, Morrow found himself unable to shake Artie West, and Hollywood wasn't about to let him either. MGM took notice of his convincing performance and wasted no time casting him in another film, this time a Western titled Tribute to a Bad Man, 1956. Though he wasn't the film's main villain, he was still playing an antagonist, reinforcing an early pattern in his career. Morrow quickly realized that he was being typecast as the bad guy, a fate many actors in Hollywood struggled to escape. He knew that if he didn't take action soon, he would be stuck playing the same one-dimensional roles for the rest of his career. Rather than waiting for Hollywood to change its mind about him, Morrow made a bold move. He stepped away from acting and went back to school. Even though he was getting steady work, he wanted more control over his career. He enrolled at the University of Southern California, USC, to study directing, believing that learning the craft from behind the camera would open new doors. It was a major risk to walk away from an active acting career, but Morrow was determined to break free from the villainous roles that were defining him. However, after completing his studies, he ultimately returned to acting. He had hoped that his time at USC would lead to different kinds of opportunities, but Hollywood was still reluctant to see him as anything other than a tough, dangerous character. Struggling to reinvent himself in film, he turned to television. Over the next few years, he built a strong presence on the small screen, appearing in numerous TV shows, including Telephone Time and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. During this period, Morrow's personal life was also evolving. In 1957, he married actress and writer Barbara Turner, beginning what seemed like a promising new chapter. The two shared a passion for the entertainment industry, and for a time, they supported each other's careers. However, despite their common interests, their marriage would eventually fall apart. If Morrow had been hoping to move past his typecasting, Hell's 5 Hours, 1958, proved that Hollywood still had other plans for him. In the film, he played yet another unhinged character, a man who takes his boss's wife and child hostage inside a rocket fuel factory, threatening to blow up the entire place. His ability to play intense, menacing roles was undeniable, but by this point he was growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of variety in his work. Hoping that a change in genre might help, Morrow accepted a role in King Creole, 1958, a musical starring Elvis Presley. But even in a completely different type of film, he found himself playing yet another thug. Despite his hopes for reinvention, Hollywood continued to see him as the same brooding, dangerous figure. The film itself was a hit, proving that Morrow could succeed in any genre, but it did little to change his reputation. In the early 1960s, writer and director Robert Pirosh had a vision for a television series that would portray the harsh realities of war with a level of authenticity rarely seen on screen. he set his sights on creating Combat, a gritty, character-driven drama that would focus on the daily struggles of American soldiers during World War II. To lead the series, he selected two actors, Rick Jason and Vic Morrow. For Morrow, this was a long-awaited opportunity to break away from his usual villainous roles and finally portray a heroic character. However, his experience on Combat would prove far more complicated than he anticipated. Despite the prestige of starring in a serious war drama, Morrow had deep reservations about joining Combat from the very beginning. He wasn't impressed with the pilot script, feeling that it lacked the realism he had hoped for. He agreed to film the pilot, but still considered walking away from the series altogether. Ironically, his co-star Rick Jason shared similar concerns. Both actors worried that the show might not do justice to the subject matter, and with its two leading men hesitant about fully committing, Combat faced an uncertain future before it had even begun. Recognizing that the show couldn't succeed without its stars, ABC took drastic action. They fired Pirosh, the series creator, and replaced him with a new producer. Stepping in to take over was Robert Altman, a director who would later become one of the defining figures of New Hollywood cinema. With Altman at the helm, the show took on a new creative direction, and Morrow finally felt comfortable embracing the role of Sergeant Chip Saunders, a battle-hardened squad leader, to ensure that Combat felt as realistic as possible. The production, Morrow, along with several other actors, had prior military experience, but they were still expected to go through drills, learn how to handle weapons, and move like real soldiers. This commitment to authenticity became one of the defining aspects of the show, setting it apart from other war dramas of the time. Beyond the physical training, the cast was also given an unexpected acting note. Don't act like John Wayne. Instructors made it clear that Wayne's over-the-top, idealized portrayals of soldiers didn't reflect the reality of war. Since Wayne had never actually served in the military, veterans often criticized his performances as being too theatrical and removed from the true experience of combat. The goal of Combat was to present something grittier and more emotionally grounded, making the characters feel like real men struggling to survive rather than invincible war heroes. The show's format also introduced an unusual approach to its opening credits, since each episode tended to focus more on one of the two leads. Combat had two versions of the credits, one where Morrow's name appeared first and another where Jason's did. This system was meant to create balance between the actors, but it also fueled a subtle rivalry. As audiences naturally gravitated toward their favorite, it became clear that one name was gaining more recognition than the other. While Combat was a hit in the United States, Morrow's popularity soared even higher overseas. In the 1970s, the show developed a massive following in the Philippines, where televisions were still a rare luxury. In poorer neighborhoods, families would gather in the few homes that had a TV set, eager to watch the latest episode. But when the opening credits rolled, there was only one name the fans wanted to see: Vic Morrow's. His portrayal of Sergeant Saunders had made a lasting impression, cementing him as the show's true star and proving that his instincts about bringing authenticity to the role had paid off. In the Philippines, Combat had such a devoted following that the opening credits alone dictated whether fans would stay glued to their screens or walk away. If Vic Morrow's name appeared first, signaling an action-heavy episode, audiences settled in, eager for the intense battle-driven storytelling that had made the show famous. But if Rick Jason's name came first, indicating an episode with more dialogue and character development, many viewers lost interest and left. For Filipino audiences, Morrow's portrayal of the gritty, battle-hardened Sergeant Saunders was the true heart of the series. His name alone was enough to command attention, proof that his star power had reached international heights. And with such influence, Morrow had no intention of slowing down. With Combat firmly established as a hit, Morrow saw an opportunity to expand his role beyond acting. He hadn't forgotten his studies in directing at USC, and now he was eager to put that training to use. Confident in his vision, he approached the producers with a request. He wanted to step behind the camera and direct an episode himself. To his delight, they agreed, giving him his first chance to shape the series from a filmmaker's perspective. His transition to directing was seamless. He had spent years embodying Sergeant Saunders, understanding the show's tone and pacing better than almost anyone. His co-star Rick Jason later praised Morrow's directorial instincts, calling him a master director and singling out a two-part episode as one of the greatest anti-war films he had ever seen. The praise reinforced Morrow's growing confidence, convincing him that he could take on even more ambitious projects. But there's a fine line between confidence and overreach, and Morrow was about to push himself further than ever before. While still working on Combat, he decided to step into the world of independent filmmaking. Rather than pursuing a mainstream Hollywood project, he chose something far more experimental, an adaptation of Haute Surveillance, a play by French writer Jean Genet. The story delved into the psychological complexities of four prisoners, exploring themes of power, sexuality, and control. It was an unconventional choice, signaling Morrow's desire to challenge audiences rather than simply entertain them. For the screenplay, he turned to someone he trusted, his wife, Barbara Turner. As both a screenwriter and actress, she brought a sharp creative eye to the project, helping to craft a script that stayed true to Genet's intense, thought-provoking themes. The couple assembled a small but dedicated team, and one of the biggest names to join them was Leonard Nimoy, best known for his portrayal of Spock in Star Trek. Nimoy signed on as a co-producer, lending his industry experience and credibility to the project. Determined to make the film as authentic as possible, Morrow took an extreme approach to preparing his actors. He arranged for them to spend 6 months inside the Nevada State Prison, living among real inmates to fully immerse themselves in the environment. But he didn't stop there. He also recruited actual prisoners to work on the film, further blurring the lines between performance and reality. The project, now titled Death Watch, was unlike anything he had ever attempted before. Despite its groundbreaking approach, Death Watch failed to find an audience. While it became one of the first films to market itself toward LGBTQ+ audiences due to its exploration of homoerotic themes, it struggled to secure a wide release. After premiering at the San Francisco International Film Festival, it quickly faded into obscurity, leaving little impact in cinematic history. Unfortunately, Death Watch wasn't the only thing that disappeared during this time. Morrow's marriage to Barbara Turner, once a strong creative partnership, began to unravel. As his career took unpredictable turns, so did his personal life. The couple, who had once collaborated so closely, found themselves growing apart. Eventually, their relationship reached a breaking point, and their marriage came to an end, marking yet another difficult chapter in Morrow's life. By 1964, he and Barbara Turner had finalized their divorce, ending not only their personal relationship but also their creative collaboration. The split was difficult, but Morrow remained deeply connected to their two daughters, Carrie Ann and Jennifer Lee. Wanting to honor them in a meaningful way, he established his own production company, naming it Carly, a blend of their names. However, despite his best intentions, the films produced under this banner would not leave the lasting impact he had hoped for. After the commercial failure of Death Watch an experimental art house film that struggled to find an audience, Morrow decided to pivot toward a more mainstream genre. He turned to the ever-popular Western, hoping that a more conventional film would boost his credibility as a director. His next project, A Man Called Sledge, 1970, was a gritty spaghetti Western filmed in Italy, featuring James Garner in the lead role. While Morrow had high hopes for the film, it quickly became clear that it wasn't resonating the way he had intended. Behind the scenes, the cast and crew were unimpressed, giving the film the unflattering nickname A Man Called Sludge. As both the director and co-writer, Morrow had invested a great deal of time and effort into the project, making the criticism especially painful. James Garner, known for his blunt honesty, later admitted that A Man Called Sledge was one of least favorite films, a statement that must have stung. Despite his best efforts to transition into directing, Morrow had yet to create a film that would establish him as a force behind the camera. Rather than dwell on the disappointment, Morrow shifted his focus back to television, where he found steady work acting and directing. He appeared in popular series such as Mission, Impossible, and Charlie's Angels, while also directing several made-for-TV movies. Though this work kept him busy and paid the bills, it was clear that he was still waiting for a project that would reignite his career and remind Hollywood of his talent. That opportunity finally arrived in 1974 with Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, a high-octane action film starring Peter Fonda, who had become a counterculture icon after Easy Rider, 1969. This role was different for Morrow. This time, he wasn't playing a criminal or an outlaw, but rather a determined law enforcement officer. Yet despite being on the right side of the law, his intense screen presence still made him feel like the film's antagonist. In Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, Morrow played a relentless sheriff chasing down two fugitives, played by Fonda and Susan George, who had robbed a supermarket and were making a daring getaway. While Morrow's character was technically the hero, audiences were more drawn to the rebellious duo, rooting for them instead. His commanding, authoritative performance once again positioned him as the hard-nosed figure standing in the way of the more charismatic leads. Then something unsettling happened on set. A key sequence in the film required Morrow's character to pursue the fugitives in a helicopter. When it came time to shoot the scene, Morrow hesitated. He voiced deep discomfort about getting into the aircraft and went so far as to threaten to quit the film unless he was provided with a $1 million life insurance policy. His demand seemed excessive at the time, just an actor being overly cautious. On the set of Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, Vic Morrow's unease about getting into the helicopter puzzled the cast and crew. When they pressed him for an explanation, his response sent chills down their spines. He reportedly told them, "I have always had a premonition that I'll be killed in a helicopter crash." At the time, his words were brushed off as nothing more than an actor's superstition. No one could have imagined how eerily accurate that statement would turn out to be. Following Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, Morrow found himself playing a strikingly similar role in the 1974 ABC TV movie The California Kid. Once again, he portrayed a ruthless sheriff obsessed with tracking down a rebellious young outlaw, this time played by Martin Sheen. The film, a stylish action thriller set in a small town where speeding drivers mysteriously disappear, was well received, but for Morrow, it felt like déjà vu. He had essentially made the same film twice, reinforcing his Hollywood reputation for playing intense law-enforcing figures. But this wasn't the only character archetype Morrow kept returning to. Throughout his career, he was frequently cast as men driven by revenge, a role that seemed to follow him from project to project. His first major foray into this type of character came in Hell's 5 Hours, 1958, where he played a man on a desperate mission of vengeance. He reprised a similar persona in Funeral for an Assassin, 1974, a South African thriller where he portrayed a former hitman waging a one-man war against the government. No matter how much time passed, Hollywood continued to see him as the perfect fit for unhinged, obsessive roles. In 1975, Morrow took on a different kind of project, one that explored real-life historical events. He starred in The Night That Panicked America, a TV movie based on the infamous War of the Worlds radio broadcast of 1938. The film recreated the nationwide hysteria that ensued when thousands of listeners believed the fictional alien invasion was real. Morrow played one of the many Americans caught up in the chaos, bringing an intensity to the role that heightened the film's dramatic impact. But while the movie explored the fear of extraterrestrial invaders, there was another oddity that caught people's attention: Morrow's age. His character at one point complains that he's 28 but looks 40. In reality, Morrow was already 44 at the time, making the line unintentionally ironic. It was yet another example of how Hollywood often cast him in roles that didn't quite align with reality. The following year, Morrow took on a role that was drastically different from his usual tough guy persona. He played a Little League baseball coach in The Bad News Bears, 1976, starring Walter Matthau and Tatum O'Neal. On the surface, this seemed like a chance for him to show a more lighthearted side, but even in a family-friendly sports movie, he was cast as the antagonist. His character, an overly aggressive coach, took his team's success far too seriously, culminating in one of the film's most infamous moments, slapping one of his own players during a crucial game. Even in a comedy, Morrow couldn't escape being the bad guy. Off-screen, however, Morrow had more pressing concerns. His two daughters, Carrie Ann and Jennifer, from his marriage to Barbara Turner. His eldest, Carrie Ann, struggled with addiction, a battle that took a toll on their family. Her mother, Turner, channeled the pain of watching her daughter's struggles into her work, writing Freedom, a drama about a teenage runaway, inspired in part by real-life experiences. Meanwhile, his younger daughter, Jennifer, would go on to surpass even her father's Hollywood legacy. Under the name Jennifer Jason Leigh, she became one of the most respected actresses of her generation, building a career that would ultimately overshadow Morrow's own. While he had spent much of his life chasing the perfect role, his daughter would go on to find the lasting success that had so often eluded him. Vic Morrow's relationship with his younger daughter, Jennifer Jason Leigh, was complicated, to say the least. While many people recognize Leigh as an acclaimed actress, few realize that she was Morrow's daughter, and that was by design. Leigh intentionally distanced herself from her father, both personally and professionally, cutting ties so completely that she even abandoned his last name. Their estrangement stemmed from a shocking revelation Morrow made when she was a teenager, one that she could never forget, let alone forgive. When Leigh was 14, Morrow decided to have what he thought would be a heart-to-heart conversation with her. He wanted to be honest about something from his past, a confession that he believed would strengthen their bond. But Leigh had no idea what was coming. And when her father finally spoke, his words shattered any hope of closeness between them. On her birthday, of all days, Morrow admitted that when she was just 2 years old, he had physically assaulted her mother, Barbara Turner, so violently that she had to be hospitalized. Leigh was stunned. The revelation was not only painful, but completely unexpected. Morrow may have thought that by sharing this dark piece of his past, he was taking accountability, perhaps even seeking redemption in his daughter's eyes. But if that was his goal, it completely backfired. Rather than bringing them closer, Morrow's confession had the opposite effect. It pushed Lee away permanently. From that moment on, she wanted nothing to do with him. The father she thought she knew had just admitted to something she found unforgivable. As she grew older and pursued an acting career, she made a deliberate decision to carve out her own identity, refusing to use the Morrow name. Instead, she chose Jennifer Jason Leigh, ensuring that any success or failure she experienced in Hollywood would be entirely her own. While Leigh became one of the most respected actresses of her generation, her older sister, Carrie Ann, faced a very different fate. Struggling with drug addiction, Carrie Ann's life was marked by hardship, a stark contrast to Leigh's rising career. The divide between them put a strain on the entire family, as they each navigated their own challenges in vastly different ways. Barbara Turner, Morrow's ex-wife, eventually turned the family's struggles into art. As an accomplished screenwriter, she channeled their painful experiences into the 1995 film Georgia, a drama about two sisters, one a successful musician, the other battling addiction. The parallels between the fictional story and the real-life struggles of Leigh and Carrie Ann were undeniable. What made the film even more surreal was Leigh's decision to take on the role of the troubled, struggling sister, the one whose journey mirrored her real-life siblings. It was a deeply personal and emotionally raw performance, earning Leigh critical acclaim, but for Morrow, watching Georgia must have been an unsettling experience. Seeing a dramatized version of his daughter's lives unfold on screen was likely a painful reminder of how fractured his family had become. In 1982, Vic Morrow was offered what seemed like a golden opportunity, a major role in one of the segments of Twilight Zone, the movie. The film was highly anticipated, bringing together some of Hollywood's most celebrated directors. Morrow's segment was helmed by John Landis, best known for blockbuster comedies like National Lampoon's Animal House and The Blues Brothers. For Morrow, this was a chance to work on a high-profile project that could re-establish him in the film industry. But what should have been a career-defining moment would instead lead to one of the most infamous tragedies in Hollywood history. Despite his efforts to escape typecasting, Twilight Zone, the movie placed Morrow in yet another villainous role. He played Bill Connor, a bitter and prejudiced man who, through a series of supernatural events, is transported to different points in history, each time forced to experience discrimination firsthand. It was a compelling story with a strong moral message, but Morrow felt uneasy about playing such a hateful character. In an attempt to make the character more redeemable, the filmmakers decided to add one final scene. This new sequence would depict Connor in war-torn Vietnam, where he would attempt to save two children, played by Renee Shin-Yi Chen and Mika Din Lee, from danger. The addition was meant to give Morrow's character a heroic moment, a chance for redemption. But this last-minute decision would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. The scene required a helicopter to hover low over Morrow and the two young actors as they waded through a river, desperately trying to escape an explosion behind them. The sequence was meant to be thrilling and dramatic, but for Morrow it carried an eerie sense of foreboding. Years earlier, while filming Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, he had made an unsettling remark: "I have always had a feeling that I'll be killed in a helicopter crash." At the time, his words had seemed like nothing more than an actor's superstition. Now, standing on set with a helicopter hovering dangerously close above him, that old fear resurfaced. As the cameras prepared to roll, Morrow's anxiety grew. He confided in a production assistant that he should have requested a stunt double. He even remarked that he must have been out of his mind to agree to the scene. But despite his unease, he pressed forward. As filming began, Morrow carried the two children through waist-deep water while the helicopter flew just above them. To heighten the intensity, A mortar effect was rigged to explode nearby. But in a horrifying turn of events, the explosion struck the helicopter, sending it into a deadly spin. The aircraft's pilot lost control as the chopper lurched downward, its massive rotor blades slicing through the air just feet above the actors. In the chaos, Morrow accidentally lost his grip on Chen, dropping her into the water. As he reached to pull her back, the helicopter crashed directly onto all three of them. The impact was immediate and devastating. Morrow, Chen, and Lei were killed instantly. What was supposed to be a moment of cinematic heroism had turned into an unimaginable real-life tragedy. 3 lives were lost in an instant, but the horror of that night was only the beginning of a legal and ethical firestorm that would shake Hollywood to its core. After the tragic deaths of Vic Morrow and the 2 child actors, Micah Din Lee and Renee Shin Yi Chen, authorities wasted no time launching a full investigation into the horrific accident on the set of Twilight Zone, the movie. What initially seemed like a terrible misfortune soon revealed itself to be a catastrophic failure of safety regulations, oversight, and decision-making. Director John Landis, along with producer Steven Spielberg, helicopter pilot Dorsey Wingo, and the technician responsible for the pyrotechnics, were all charged with involuntary manslaughter. The tragedy had already shaken Hollywood, but as the details emerged, the situation appeared even more damning than anyone initially realized. One of the most shocking revelations was that the 2 children should never have been on set that night at all. California labor laws strictly prohibited minors from working during nighttime hours unless the production obtained a special waiver, which required strict safety protocols. However, the filmmakers never applied for one, meaning that Lee and Chen's presence in the scene was not only extremely dangerous, but also illegal. Had the proper paperwork been filed, it's possible that stricter safety regulations would have been enforced, preventing the tragedy altogether. Even more distressing was the fact that the children's parents were completely unaware of the extreme risks their children were being exposed to. Neither of them had been informed that their kids would be in close proximity to live explosives or a low-flying helicopter. The parents had been told it would be a simple scene, and had they known the full extent of the dangers, they might have refused to allow their children to participate. Instead, they unknowingly sent them into a situation that would cost them their lives. As the trial progressed, even more unsettling details came to light. On the night of the accident, it became evident that the set had already been growing more dangerous. The production manager, recognizing the increasing risks, instructed the helicopter pilot, Dorsey Wingo, to move the aircraft away from Morrow and the children. It was a clear warning that things were getting out of control. But instead of pulling back, the pilot remained in place, and the decision that followed only made the situation worse. According to witness testimony, just as safety concerns were mounting, John Landis gave a direct and reckless command: get lower, lower. Rather than prioritizing the well-being of his cast and crew, he pushed for a more dramatic shot, ordering the helicopter to descend even closer to the actors. The pilot, following Landis's instructions, obeyed. Seconds later, disaster struck. During the trial, Wingo attempted to shift some of the blame onto Morrow. He testified that he had warned the actor to look up at the helicopter just in case something went wrong. He also claimed that Morrow had 5 seconds from the moment the helicopter lost control until impact. But even if that were true, what could Morrow have possibly done in those few seconds? The reality was that Morrow had no chance to react. It was nighttime. The set was filled with smoke, fire, and explosions, and he was carrying 2 young children in his arms. The noise of the rotor blades, combined with the chaos of the scene, made it impossible to anticipate the disaster that was about to unfold. with a helicopter hovering dangerously above them and special effects detonating around them. There was no time for anyone to escape. In the end, the crash happened so fast that there was nothing anyone could do. The tragedy unfolded in mere moments, taking the lives of Morrow, Lee, and Chen instantly. The horrifying accident not only ended 3 lives, but also sent shock waves through the film industry, raising urgent questions about safety standards, directorial responsibility, and the price of pushing boundaries in Hollywood. Vic Morrow's death was one of the most shocking tragedies in Hollywood history, sparking a wave of industry-wide reforms that forever changed the way stunts and special effects are handled. Though his life was cut short, his impact on film and television endures. His story serves as a reminder of the risks actors take to bring powerful performances to life. What are your thoughts on Vic Morrow's life and eerie premonition? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.